The legacy of Hollywood is often presented as a pristine, gilded story, an era of titans, goddesses, and effortless, shimmering genius where art conquered all. But what happens when you peel back the gold leaf? What is revealed is a brutal history, a set of toxic pathologies, where the very institutions meant to foster creativity instead empowered figures who treated human beings as disposable tools. Stater. The Golden Age was not golden at all. It was a world built on silent, sanctioned cruelty, where talent became the ultimate moral shield. The question is not whether brilliance and darkness can coexist, but how long we can continue to separate the art from the monster who created it. And to a discerning historian, the list of those who operated beyond the boundaries of decency is far longer than 6. We are not here to judge the films they left behind, but to finally hold a mirror up to the men and women who shattered the lives of those who helped build their monuments. These are the other 6 figures whose cruelty and unchecked power defined the dark side of American cinema's first true century. Say, we begin with Alfred Hitchcock, a man revered as the master of suspense, the intellectual architect of the thriller genre. But to those who were trapped in his artistic obsession, he was a silent sadist. Hitchcock's films dealt in controlling narratives and meticulously constructed terror, and he seemed determined to replicate this toxic environment in his own life, particularly with his leading ladies. For actress Tippi Hedren, her time working on The Birds and Marnie became a waking nightmare, a psychological prison orchestrated by a man whose infatuation curdled into possessive rage. Hedron was a discovery, a beautiful icy blonde designed to fulfill a specific cinematic fantasy, and Hitchcock demanded absolute ownership over her image and her career, manipulating her contract and systematically isolating her from her co-stars and crew. The control escalated into outright harassment, culminating in an assault in his office, and when she finally rejected him, Hitchcock's famous, calculated cruelty was unleashed. He reportedly warned her that he would destroy her career, a threat he systematically followed through on by keeping her locked into her contract while refusing to cast her in anything, effectively shelving a major star at the height of her powers. Hedron's subsequent struggle to work for decades stands as a chilling testament not only to Hitchcock's power, but to the sheer willingness of the studio system to bury the story of a victim to protect a profitable genius. Fai aus. Ensuring the art was preserved while the artist's pathology was never questioned. Following the director of controlled terror, we must examine Stanley Kubrick, a man whose genius is undeniable, but whose methods pushed the boundaries of emotional abuse into the realm of outright psychological warfare. Kubrick's quest for authenticity and his ruthless perfectionism often came at the direct expense of his actor's sanity, with his most infamous victim being actress Shelley Duvall on the set of The Shining. The role of Wendy Torrance required a fragile, hysterical panic, and Kubrick, with calculated and cold precision, set out to methodically break Duvall down emotionally and physically to achieve it. He isolated her, forbade the crew from offering her sympathy, and subjected her to a non-stop barrage of criticism, often screaming at her in front of the entire cast, and demanding over 127 takes for a single scene, turning her life into a documented hell on set. Duvall reportedly lost clumps of hair from the stress, dehydrated, and was in a constant state of tears and terror. A performance that, while lauded for its realism, was fundamentally an unrehearsed emotional breakdown, captured on film. Tim. Boo. While some defend Kubrick's methods as a necessary evil for art, his treatment of Duvall illustrates a deeper, more monstrous truth. That a director's vision, when unchecked by human empathy, can become a weapon of psychological destruction. It is a frightening example of how the Hollywood apparatus, obsessed with the masterpiece, will always prioritize the finished product over the well-being of the person performing in it. The list of Hollywood monsters is not confined to its men. The sheer, raw tyranny of Joan Crawford must also be examined. A figure whose public persona was elegance and power, but whose private and on-set behavior was a catalogue of demands, paranoia, and cruelty that transcended the bounds of femme fatale. Professionalism. Crawford's relentless ambition was her driving force, and anyone who stood in the way of her manufactured glamour or her ascent was met with a calculated, crushing response. Stories of her abuse against her adopted children, most famously documented in the memoir Mommy Dearest. reveal a deep and terrifying pathology where love was transactional and control was absolute, characterized by emotional manipulation and shocking physical violence. But the cruelty was not reserved just for her family. On set, she was famously demanding and difficult, often generating an atmosphere of terror among the crew and her co-stars. Her professional rivalry with Bette Davis on Whatever Happened to Baby Jane became legendary, not just for the passive-aggressive drama, but for the genuine, sustained hatred and calculated attempts to sabotage Davis's performance. The studio system, seeing her as a powerful icon, indulged her demands and excused her behavior, allowing her reign of terror to continue until she was too old to be profitable. Crawford's story is a stark reminder that unchecked celebrity and manufactured myth can create a tyrant, a woman whose relentless chase for perfection left a legacy of human wreckage that is far more compelling and tragic than her actual films. We turn now to Charles Laughton, a revered stage and screen actor who also dabbled in directing, leaving behind one of cinema's most haunting masterpieces, The Night of the Hunter. Laughton's contribution to film history is small but mighty, yet his reputation among his peers was one of an impossibly demanding, psychologically manipulative artist whose own deep-seated self-loathing fueled his treatment of others. Laughton's personal life was fraught with complexity, and his struggle with his own identity and sexuality often seemed to manifest as outward hostility and an obsessive, brutalizing approach to his artistic collaborators. During the filming of The Night of the Hunter, his perfectionism on set was legendary, pushing crew members to the brink and subjecting actors to endless, soul-crushing takes in his quest for a specific, often unspoken emotional pitch. He reportedly used mockery and humiliation as his primary tools of direction, creating a fear-based environment that drained the energy and confidence of those around him. Though his single directorial effort is lauded, it was a process so arduous and personally draining that Laughton never directed a film again, perhaps realizing the emotional cost his methods incurred on himself and those around him. No. Laughton's legacy is a cautionary tale about the high price of artistic genius, a terrifying example of how deep personal turmoil can be projected outward or weaponized against colleagues in the name art, ultimately leaving behind a beautiful film, but a host of broken working relationships and unvoiced professional trauma. Next, we consider Orson Welles, the boy genius of cinema whose career began with the revolutionary Citizen Kane, but whose later life was plagued by the perception of arrogance and an ego so vast it became a career, destroying liability. While Wells's sins were less about direct physical or sexual assault than those of others, his cruelty lay in his breathtaking arrogance and his inability to collaborate. A destructive genius who believed the rules of commerce and human relations did not and should not apply to him. Wells's rise was swift, and his fall was protracted, a lengthy, self-inflicted exile from the mainstream studio system. He was notorious for burning bridges, walking off projects, demanding impossible control, and engaging in erratic behavior that sabotaged his own films, frequently leaving crews waiting for hours and generating an atmosphere of uncertainty and financial peril. His reputation for being an impossible partner meant that powerful figures in Hollywood were unwilling to back his projects, not because he lacked talent, but because his personal chaos and ego made him too great a risk. Welles, often blaming the studios for his downfall, failed to acknowledge that his own colossal self-regard and his contempt for anyone he deemed less intelligent were the true architects of his cinematic collapse. His story is a powerful illustration of the industry's deep-seated tolerance for immense ego. Hollywood will protect a genius who is a monster, but it will eventually abandon one who is merely a drain on resources and a source of professional humiliation. Fuck. Finally, we arrive at Gene Kelly, at the beloved, smiling figure of the Golden Age musical, whose athleticism and grace on screen concealed an explosive temper and a famously brutal, tyrannical demeanor as a choreographer and director. Kelly's dancing partner, an endless source of public joy, was reportedly a terror in the rehearsal studio, driven by a hypermasculine, military-style discipline that often spilled over into verbal and emotional abuse. Kelly's relentless pursuit of physical perfection in his choreography created a high-stakes, fear-based work environment where mistakes were met with scathing public humiliation. His most famous co-star, Debbie Reynolds, working on Singin' in the Rain, often spoke of the sheer terror and exhaustion she endured under his direction, being pushed to physical and emotional limits that left her weeping under a piano, threatened with career ruin if she did not perform to his exacting standards. Kelly's insistence on his own singular vision and his refusal to tolerate anything less than his perceived ideal made him an on-set tyrant, proving that the brightest smiles on screen can hide the deepest, most controlling rage. His legacy serves as a crucial reminder that the sheer physical artistry of the Golden Age was sometimes forged in an atmosphere of intimidation and professional fear. The studio system excused it all, classifying his behavior as artistic passion or dedication, thereby giving him license to inflict emotional damage under the guise of creation. The industry protected the image of the graceful performer, ignoring the damage done by the man who demanded that grace at any cost. These six figures, Hitchcock, Kubrick, Crawford, Laughton, Wells, and Kelly, form another layer to the dark history of Hollywood. They are proof that power in the studio system corrupts absolutely, and that the audience, generation after generation, is willingly complicit in the moral bargain. We accept the genius and ignore the damage done to the lives that surrounded them. We must ask ourselves when the curtain closes, which of these shadows frightens us more? The manipulator, the tyrant, or the cold perfectionist who breaks their caste for the sake of a single, perfect frame? Let me know in the comments below.